Alfie Noakes, comedy, stand-up comedy. Now, I always assumed he was a stand-up comic, but he's actually, I know he's an MC as well, but I didn't know the difference between, usually I think an MC during a comedy show is a comedian. In this case, he's not, although he's got lots of material. He is a teacher. He's a coach. He's of comedy. He's also an MC, and it's an important job to weave between all of the acts. Some, he says, between 10 to 15. Some are open micers, some are more polished, but just the discipline of comedy. And I open up with what's funny. What's funny to you? What does funny mean? Very interesting answer. He's a former film journalist, a documentarian. He made this shift over. He's very funny, by the way, and he's got these great tips on social media. After writing, read it out loud, write jokes for yourself. We go through that. I ask him about motivation. I ask him what success looks like. I ask him the role of discipline, and it's very interesting in the comedy world what he views as discipline. But it's a great conversation with Alfie. I really, really enjoyed it. And, he's from London. And so just the whole difference between crowds there as well is a great topic. I really enjoyed my conversation with Alfie Noakes. Thanks for listening. Hi, I'm Joey Pinz. People ask me, how did I lose 130 pounds? The quick answer is always discipline. I started my business, wasn't paying attention to my health, was eating too much, drinking too much sweets. My daughter was born. Next thing I know, I'm pre-diabetic. I have hypertension. I knew something had to change. Discipline. I, like many of you, have faced many challenges in your career, in your family, in your life, in your faith. How did you attack them? How did you approach them? How did you solve them, hopefully? It all had to have some degree of discipline. I'm also asked, how did you found and start a tech business? And it lasted over 25 years. Discipline. I was committed to it, enjoyed technology, didn't enjoy some aspects of it, but knew it was necessary. Discipline. Our podcast mission, how do we use discipline to better ourselves and society? Join me, please, as I talk to interesting people and discuss how they use discipline in their family and their passion and their careers and how it helped them. Our podcast vision, growth through learning from others. Joey Pinz Disciple Conversations. It'll be light and serious. Join us, please. Thank you for consideration. Alfie Noakes, thank you so much for your time. Very, very excited to talk to you. Alfie, what's funny?
What, in the world?
Generally. Tell me what funny is.
Fat people falling over is something of a classic. If you go through the annals of comedy history, it was a mainstay for a long time, right the way up until, I think, probably the more recent period, your John Belushi's and your Chris Farley's. That's something that seems to be eternally funny. Broadly speaking, something bad happening to other people that isn't necessarily that bad, but comical, A little old lady falling over in the street isn't funny, but somebody who's just been arrogant and cocky and then turning around and walking into a lamppost or something, that's funny. A definition of satire would be pointing out the difference between how somebody wants to be considered and regarded and how they're actually coming across would be a definition of satire. So that's a way of being funny. I think a golden rule of comedy is surprise. Most comedy is based on surprise. There has to be logic within it, which is why comedians are such masters of misdirection. They send the audience over here, as Billy Crystal so beautifully demonstrated in the underrated film Mr. Saturday Night. I send them over here, and then I drop them over here, and then they laugh. There's 1,000 definitions of what's funny, but there's a few that first came to mind, sir.
Surprise in the punchline?
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah, so the setup is exactly that, the setup. It should be a perfectly orchestrated amount of information. If you give too much information, just like in a movie, if there's too much information, say in a horror film, you know where the serial killer is, there's not going to be a shock. If you don't have enough information, it just doesn't make sense. So many jokes need calibrating over time to get that sweet spot of information. Often, as I say, misdirection. You can use classic tricks would be Homonyms and homophones, these are words that have multiple meanings, such as dear. It could be that cute animal from Bambi. It could be that something is very expensive. It could be my beloved. So if you use that word appropriately in the setup, and then the punchline reveals, oh, it's actually meaning something else, and then the audience have to do a subconscious, fast, logical twist in their head and go, yes, it does make sense. There is a logical
Mm.
chain there. Then that's arguably the ingredient for a successful joke. If the logic breaks down, then the joke won't work. And in fact, a comedian would do harm to themselves because further to that joke not working, the audience will somehow have a subconscious conversation with themselves going, that doesn't make sense. That's not how that works. And to some degree or other, they've been pulled out of the performance, which is at the end of the day a spoken word performance. There's not really light shows and dancers and all the things that say
Mm.
musicians can have or special effects that movies can have. Ultimately, it's a man or a woman at a microphone and what they're saying going through the PA and into the ears of the audience, and then generating images and ideas for the audience to be entertained by. It's a fairly clear kind of recipe.
And when you hear a joke, Alfie, do you think misdirection, satire? Do you immediately label it? Do
No,
you? I mean, you're such from the inside. Do you see it? Do you see kind of the skeleton of the joke, or do you actually like participate in it?
not really. No, I'm so glad this is the case. Otherwise, I'd never have joy in comedy again. I mean, in a former
Mm.
career, I was a film journalist and a film critic, and people used to ask me the same, like, "Can you really enjoy film? You know, you're
Mm.
really mindful that it's the end of Act One. Here's the inciting incident. I know the language of cinema very well." But no, if it's a well-made film, I just get as carried away and as drawn into the film as anybody else. I would always be mindful to ask how long the film is before I went in, because I want to mentally
Mm.
pace myself. So, like Scorsese's The Irishman, 3.5 hours. You got to pace yourself ready for that. If you didn't know, so you went to see Lord of the Rings, 3 hours, I think the first one was. 2 hours in, you're going to be like, what's going on? So there's a pacing thing that always goes on. But as far as jokes go, it's only really when the punch has landed that I'm in a position to even assess what kind of joke it is. Yes, I could probably observe it's observational comedy or it's a pun right at the beginning. But no, by and large, in any performance, I'm sitting back and enjoying it almost as much as anybody else, but I am certainly more savvy to being able to spot the lower quality punchlines coming because they're lower
Mm.
quality. But great masters, the Dave Chappelle's, the Stuart Lees, whoever you want to refer to. Very rarely am I able to see their punchlines coming. I'm just another punter who just happens to be fluent in the language of stand-up comedy.
And Alfie, when you create a joke, do you say, okay, this one's going to be pun, this is going to be redirection, this is going to be surprise?
Well, no, first of all, I should be very clear. I'm not a comedian. I'm a
At all?
unicorn. No, I'm a unicorn in the world of stand up comedy. So I think I started 13 years ago, helping with a friend. We set up an open mic night as a hobby. I'd always been a huge comedy fan and I'd quietly hankered to have a go at it, but I was too scared, which is weird because I'm
Mm.
typically a very bold person. I've done all sorts of bold things in my life, but it always intimidated me too much. So I was a hands off figure running the night. And then on that first night, I caught four, maybe five joke thieves. And I was able to tell them whose joke it was, which comedy special it was from. And that made me realize, oh, I actually know quite a lot more about this than I realized. So I did a few open mic spots. My first one went exceptionally well. I've watched over 500 people do their first stand up gig. And it's single digits that did really well on their first go. And I would say, in fact, I was lucky enough to be one of them. So of course, the natural reaction is to that is for me to go, oh, just a natural. This is so easy. And of course, the following week, I had another go, and you've never seen a harder car crash in your life.
Mm.
It was
Mm.
diabolical. I did about 8 or 9 open spots of varying degrees of quality, but for a number of reasons, I have no aspiration to be a comedian in reality. I had a young child. There's typically a lot of travel involved. I'm not particularly inclined to be constantly paying attention for things that might be a joke, taking note of something funny something else said. But then I had a go at emceeing, and that was my groove. I'm a good speaker. I hope you'll agree by the end of this interview. I've
Mm.
led a colourful life. I've got good stories. I'm pretty fast thinking. Crowd work kind of came naturally to me. And I was a TV producer in a former life. So bringing in my TV production skills to an open mic room basically allowed me to create the best open mic room in London, and it was the case for several years. So no, I'm not a comedian. I am an MC, a booker, a promoter. I've MC'd over 1,000 shows. I've hosted over 10,000 open mic acts, hundreds of
Mm.
professional acts who still headline my shows. I get to chat to them afterwards, the pros, and get insights from them. Some I'm proud to call my friends. And then I've run a number of workshops, produced those originally bringing in professionals to teach workshops to the open mic community. But by definition of producing the workshop, I get to take the workshop. And then I'm
Mm.
emceeing 4 nights a week. So I will go on the stage and I would sometimes do what they said to do, but by and large, I'd figured it out for myself by then. But I didn't know all the things you weren't supposed to do, the knots.
Mm.
So I would actively go up and do the things my teachers in various topics of comedy, from clowning and writing for radio and emceeing before I started teaching that one myself, and find out every time their advice is correct. I really shouldn't have done that. So over the years, as I say, 10,000 acts, hundreds of them have come and asked me questions at the end of the gig. Equally, well over 100 live workshops, with a dozen or more people in each. It was fairly clear that there were the same rough questions, and it's over 100 questions, but roughly the same 150 questions would come over again and again and not go beyond those barriers. So, I was certainly astute to what the answers were to those questions through my own close observation from being asked those questions, and then paying attention in my shows for years to make sure I was getting a clear, lucid answer. And also in those workshops, the professionals were answering those questions. So I was having the benefit of taking on board what they said. So I'm quite the unicorn. I'm a comedy coach, but I'm not a comedian. Most people who teach comedy are some degree of successful or lesser successful comedians. There are exceptions in there, but they're coming from a place of being an outright act. I've been right next to the stage for thousands and thousands of people, seeing what went right, what went wrong. And equally importantly, of course, is I've watched several acts work their way through years. So I've seen what the trajectory is and what they did right and what they did wrong on their journeys. So, I am something of a unicorn. I teach comedy, but I'm not a comedian.
But as an MC, there are kind of shades of. I mean, you still tell jokes every
Oh, yeah,
once.
yeah,
You kind of
absolutely. I can get laughs.
So what's the difference?
Well, on the way to a gig, I would typically just look at the day's news and write a few jokes based on that, just to prove topical jokes.
Mm.
Often it'll be jokes about the venue itself, it'll be jokes about the crowd, and of course, you don't know who the crowd's going to be and what traits they're going to demonstrate. Sometimes something just magical will pop out of your mouth, and that was true and spontaneous, but I remember it and I can use it again in the future, giving the illusion it's suddenly magical and spontaneous. But the fact is, over a period of years, I've said it many times. So, with my own colourful life stories, as with everything, practice makes perfect. When you've done it well over 1,000 times, I'm not saying I'm
Mm.
perfect, but I'm bloody good. So it's a mix of being able to write jokes rather easily. I know what enough of the recipes are, being current, and everything else that I just said to you. Telling stories and crowd work are probably my main strength. Crowd work isn't really something comedians should be focusing on too much, but that's changing right now with the nature of social
Mm.
media, because the crowd work clips are becoming very popular on the short form channels, Instagram and TikTok and the like. Because if a comedian puts out their very best material on those platforms, well, that's their best material. It's what in the industry is what we call they've burnt it. If you go on the Late Show with Stephen Colbert and you do your best set, fantastic. You'll hopefully impress the nation. But jokes don't get funnier with repetition, because that surprise element I mentioned to you earlier is
Mm.
lost. Jokes don't get funnier the more you hear. With music, you can become more fond of it. It can create some kind of groove in your brain of familiarity,
Mm.
and you pick up the groove and the beat in a way you didn't maybe the first time you heard it. It's just the opposite with comedy.
It's fascinating to me that you make the distinction. I just assume, like, I go to many comedy shows, and I just assume that the MC is also a comedian. But you're
Usually
saying
they
there's a
are.
clear difference.
No, usually they are.
Usually they are.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
So most comedians, excuse me, most MCs are comedians who are on this particular show emceeing that night. So rather than needing
right.
to be there for just however long their set is, it changes on the nature of the show, the city, the country. But let's say it's a 20-minute set they're expected to do. A professional comedian would try and double, triple, quadruple up and just go from gig to gig to gig. They might open at one at 8 o'clock, go to another gig, and close another one at 11:30. An MC, of course,
Mm.
can't do that. They're the first one on, and they are the last one off. They're the linchpin to the show. So most comedians,
Hmm.
in my mind, not enough young, or I don't even need to say young, new, because lots of people in the open mic circuit aren't necessarily young. Newer comedians would be doing themselves a huge service if they started having a go at MCing. All of the great comedians, the successful comedians that you know, the Chris Rock, whoever you think, the big names, Netflix specials, in our country appearing on Live at the Apollo and the like, they can all definitely MC. They've all spent many, many, many nights MCing because it forces you to stretch your skill set. Here, an open mic act in London, a highly competitive scene. There's lots and lots of open mic nights. Obviously, not necessarily the case in other places around the country or around the world. But here, common currency is you get a 5 minute set. When you become better and advanced, you'll get sevens and tens. And then after that,
Mm.
you'll jump us to a 20. And then if you've got a great 20, you really should be navigating more towards the pro rooms and then maybe coming to the open mic rooms to work out your new material. So on a show when I was emceeing, I'm probably on stage 25 minutes in a night. And for that, I
Right.
can do some topical jokes. I just wrote on the way to the gig. I've just looked at the newspaper, proven this is fresh from the oven comedy. And audiences always give you a little bit more if they recognize, well, that's got to be a brand new joke because it's about something that happened in the news this morning. So if on a laughter scale out of 10, it might have got me 6 out of 10, a decent laugh, but they're not rolling in the aisles, they'll probably give it one or two more because they recognize it as brand new, fresh, or, almost improvised. Anything that seems just really fast flowing and improvised is always more popular and highly regarded. Hence, another reason why the crowd work clips on social media are so popular now because it is
Mm.
good stuff, it is funny, it definitely reflects well on the comedian, and it means they're not burning their material. They can save
Hmm.
that for when an audience actually comes and pays to see them. But on top of writing those fresh jokes, I do have jokes. I've got hours worth of material in real terms. I've never written it down, but I can MC 20 shows in a row and not say the same thing twice outside of
Hmm.
we'll finish at this time and welcome to the show and my name's Alfie, all the obvious tropes. But I could certainly do 20 shows in a row, making the audience laugh throughout with different stories and jokes and not repeat myself once. So if an act wants to really go forward, one of the strongest things they can do is MC because they develop the crowd work, riffing, crowd management. They get an angle on running a show they don't get from a comedian's point of view because comedians, by definition, it's a lone wolf trade. They're only interested in themselves by and large. And these are my people. I'm not knocking them, but it is a singular self-interest when they book with me and they want a spot. My agenda as the MC and the promoter is the show itself. So I need to be good as the MC. If I've got a guest MC, I need for them to be good. I need some of my acts to be good. I'm more than happy for some of
Mm.
them to not be good because brand new acts rarely are. But once they've had a little bit of stage experience, if they're wise and they take maybe a course from myself or somebody else, they can, fast track themselves a bit, avoid some rookie errors, and get from like phase two from phase one much quicker than just working it out the classic long hard way. And then, just basic issues of kind of housekeeping. There's a lot more skills in MCing, but every one of those skills will enhance an open mic comedian to become a superior open mic comedian. And superior open mic comedians are a step nearer to becoming professional comedians. It's a super skill.
Along with that, how does the performance of the MC influence the performance of the acts of the comedians? Is there a connection?
Oh, most certainly. I would argue, and this is not just because I am an MC, I think the most important element, and I think this is a fairly common opinion in the comedy industry, the most important element in a show is, in fact, the MC.
Hmm.
Because they're the linchpin. A good MC will position themselves as your friendly guide through the night. We've got to have integrity. If an act dies on stage and they've just done 5 minutes of laughter free performance, the last thing in the world I will do is come on and go, weren't they great, ladies and gentlemen, in an effort to make them feel better about themselves, because
Mm.
I've just lost my integrity in front of the crowd. They're not inclined to believe me. But I also have a duty of care to that act as an MC, and it's a terrible thing. This is a very amateur thing that sadly a lot of open mic level MCs do. You'll never see a pro act do it. because they know better. But a lot of lower level open mic comedians think that part of their job is finding an audience member to tear into or to put the boot in on an act who's just done badly. Trust me, the punishment is built in. If an act's just tried to make an audience laugh for 5 minutes and nobody laughed, they're feeling that. They don't need me walking back on stage going, ladies and gentlemen, that was Dave. Wasn't he bloody terrible? But I've got other devices of managing it. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Dave. It was just his ninth ever go at stand-up comedy. Give him a round of applause. It takes a lot of courage to come and have a go on stage like this. Would you have you say you won't? And then I talk to the audience, very quickly moving on and finding out that audience members are quite happy to confess that they wouldn't come on stage and try and give it a go. And if they've done a lot more than 9 gigs, then maybe my liners. So what I love about this job, ladies and gentlemen, no 2 gigs are the same, no 2 acts are the same. Always a colourful night every time. Give them on a round of applause and then I move on. I'll do something funny for 30 seconds.
Smart.
Hopefully allow the audience to forget that something bad just happened. But I also have a responsibility to reset the room so that the next act coming on, by and large, is coming on to the same kind of energy that the previous act did and the act before them. And conversely, if an act is done fantastically, and I need to stress this, there are some amazing acts in the open mic scene. Some of them have a lot more than 5 minutes or 10 minutes. Some of them are really advanced and they're just popping in to work out the new material in front of a non-paying crowd. Some of them only have 5 minutes, but they're killer 5 minutes. And if they've performed so well, it's also my responsibility to come back and calm the room down just a fraction so that it's not such a hard act to follow. And then the next act has something, again, of like an even playing field to come on without the without the stage being skewed for him. So there's all sorts of dynamics going on as an MC.
Yeah.
We're not just talking to the crowd and we're not just bringing on the next act. We're not just timing everything, but we're doing all of that. But it's about sustaining integrity, a friendly connection with the audience, and really everything anchors around us. If you go to an open mic show, it will totally depend on the nature of the show and where it is. There's all sorts of formats. But typically my shows involve 12 to 14 5-minute acts, or maybe 12 5-minute acts and a 10-minute act, somebody I'm progressing, and then a 20-minute headliner who's pro or semi-pro. And I can attract the pros and the semi-pros because I'll say, give me half of tried and tested gold, guaranteed laughs. We know that, but you're welcome to do some new material because they need a place to work out new material as well. And then once they've ironed that out, then they can take that to the paid venues. It really depends how many people you have on a bill accordingly. But, I can have a third of the bill be genuinely awful as acts, and that's no problem at all. No problem at all.
You hear that comedians never want to follow someone who just killed. So, I mean, as an MC, you want to make sure you don't do the same thing, correct? Are you aware of that?
Yeah, I think the third time I ever MC'd, a slightly more experienced MC than me, by which I mean he's still in single digits. And as I said, I went on to do well over 1,000. Told me that it's very important that an MC is never funnier than the acts. And I think that's absolute nonsense. Because every laugh is valuable. But if the act that was just on, as I said, maybe did badly. I'm sorry, a point I was going to try and come to a second ago. I'd just like to finish that. In a show like mine, where you might have something like 14 acts, well, it's a different beast being an MC in an open mic room. And there are some incredible professional MCs in the professional rooms. I'm not sure I in any way would want to challenge them as to who the best MC is, because there's every chance I'd lose, good as I am. But the fact is, in a pro room, again, depends on the format, but they've typically got 3, maybe 4 acts, which means they're on and off stage 4, maybe 5 times, opening the show, introducing the second act, and so on and so forth. In my show, I'm on up and down on stage 15 times. And some of my acts are almost certainly going to die in their arse and do badly. Whereas in a professional room, the standard is very high by definition. They're professional. So the odds are that a professional MC doesn't have to pick the room up because an act has just tanked. It does happen, but it's rare. But on one of my shows, or indeed any open mic show, it's guaranteed some acts are going to tank. It's an absolute part of the process, and it's fine. I've taken great pride in giving acts dozens and hundreds of opportunities to gig with me over and over until they figured it out. But I just can't have too many of them on one bill. So arguably,
Mm.
as an open mic MC, I get more stage time and I've got more danger to deal with, and I've got to be up and down more times than a professional does. So if you can master it in my open mic arena, by the time you get to the pro standard, it should be a walk in the park.
Mm.
But I want to make it clear that I'm well aware of some professional MCs just here in London, never mind around the nation, that I know I can't hold a candle to as far as being an
Hmm.
MC, because they're already master comedians and can draw on all of that material as well as being great MCs. So in no way am I laying down a gauntlet to some of these masters, but I am very, very good at what I do, and some of these guys are unbelievably good at what they do. But I would say
Mm.
I do the heavier lifting.
When a comedian does a large percentage of their act, you mentioned crowd work before. With crowd work, is that lazy? A bit lazy?
Doing their act as crowd work, is that the question?
Yeah, instead of having material, actually doing crowd work. I hear people complain about that. The comedian did 3/4 of their act as crowd work, and they didn't really
Yeah.
have material.
I think there'll be a complaint one way and not the other. It personally doesn't bother me. It never really has. But I know it tends to be a bugbear to fellow MCs of a decent standard. And that's if an act comes up and they're doing almost only crowd work, which is really the MC's
Mm.
domain, and they don't do any of their written material. And then the MC's got to come on and basically just do a continuation of crowd work, and their style may not
Mm.
necessarily gel with the act. In my opinion, really, the act should stick to their set. You know, in a 5 minute set, you've got something in the region of 850 or 900 words to deliver. So if you start talking to the crowd, you know, even just for seconds, you're using up percentage points of that script, the set that you thought of and wrote and practiced and edited and rehearsed and edited down again and punched up and tried last week and it didn't work great. But you know there's something there. So you've
Mm.
redrafted it somehow, changed some of the ordering and brought it back. Why would you do all of that work as a comedian and then turn up at a gig like mine and just start talking to the crowd? If you want to do that,
Mm.
then get yourself some MC spots. They're not that easy to come by, to be fair. But
Mm.
I don't really mind if it personally if an act does lots of crowd work. It doesn't trouble me. But yeah, there's plenty in the industry who do find it to be something of an issue. Um, but you know, then would a comedian complain about an MC such as myself doing lots of material? Absolutely not, because it's part of what we're expected to do. I mean, if that's all I did, it would be a bit weird because I've got to greet the audience, explain to them what's happening during the night. You know, I teach, I've got these, I do one to one coaching, I've got these 3 courses. And something I very much make clear, certainly for the beginners, is to do jokes. Ideally, write something topical for the reasons I explained earlier. It will get extra bonus points because the audience recognise it as oven fresh. But also, you know, have a look around the venue that you're performing in. Pick something notable, something weird that's kind of behind me on the stage, because obviously I'm the only one facing that way. Everybody else is looking this way. I don't want to point at something that makes the entire room have to look over their shoulder. That's breaking
Mm.
the rhythm. But if I can find something weird in the room that all the audience can see and make a decent joke off that, yet again the audience appreciate. Well, that's a joke that can only be told here. You know, he doesn't do that at every gig he goes to because it only makes sense in this room. Look how fast-witted this person is, and audiences respect that and will laugh that bit harder accordingly. So there are
Mm.
tricks and tropes of writing a topical joke. You know, get a big laugh at the beginning of the set is really important because then the audience will relax and trust you. If your first 3 jokes die, it's way harder to get the audience back than if the first 3 jokes fly and then a few tank and then they fly again.
Mm.
Much easier.
Mm.
But showing something topical, showing something, as I call in my courses, in the room joke, this wins over the audience very quickly. And in my opinion, it keeps, emerging comedians on their toes. It gives them a structure that requires them to keep writing and generating new material. Because the worst thing in the world in comedy is an act that just does the same set over and over again
Mm.
to the point that I ban them from my room, or at least I ban them from doing certain jokes. I'm like, I've heard that too many times. Go away, write some new material. You're welcome back, but that joke has had its day. Because if
Hmm.
I've got to sit and watch 14 acts in a night, most of whom I've seen before, maybe, 10 out of 14 I've almost certainly seen before, and they're all doing the same material, it makes it excruciating for me. So if they're pushing the same material too long, I'm like, look, you must have figured out by now either it works or it doesn't. So drop it here or drop it all together, but write something new the next time I see you. And it's for their own good as well as for me. It saves me from being bored. But if they're just resting on the same 5 minutes, well, that's not exactly artistic integrity, is it? They're not exactly pushing themselves.
Hmm. Are there Alfie? Are there bad crowds?
Oh God, yes, yeah. It's a complete misnomer in comedy that there is no such thing as a bad crowd. They absolutely
Yeah.
exist. Let me be clear. Certainly, myself in the early days, so I've been guilty of this. Would call out either a bad show or my own bad performance as being a bad crowd. I remember one show in particular when everybody in the room, as far as performers go, thought they were a bad crowd, and I had a particularly brilliant headliner that night. A masterful, wonderful man here, Patrick Monahan, happened to be my headliner, who's a killer. And he just came in and just ripped the lid off the roof, blew the place apart.
Mm.
It's like, well, it was obviously within our means and we just weren't good enough. So I would say that was a
Hmm.
harder audience, but it wasn't a bad audience. A great comedian proved you could take them. But yes, there are scenarios, and I've run into them. I would say a hen night, a hen party, lots of drunk women with traffic cones on their head and that kind of thing who aren't really into comedy. They're just been into being drunk and throwing things at each other and being mouthy at the acts. Two or three couples in the room, all of whom have just had a row before they walk in, alongside
Mm.
the hen party, alongside a really old couple who probably aren't going to appreciate swearing. And you're like, how the hell did you come in here?
Mm.
I used to run a gig here in the city of London, which is like our financial centre, the central business district. It is known as the city. Lloyd's of London, all of the banks are around there. So we used to get a lot of what we call wanker banker types coming in, the guys in their suits. And if it was going into, say, a bank holiday weekend, a lot of them will be coked up. They've been on the coke since 4 in the
Nice.
afternoon. And they come in a group of 30. And they're really not that interested in listening to what the acts are saying. What they're interested in is making each other laugh. So
Mm.
they've been emboldened by their coke and just general dickish natures, and they'll shout something out that isn't funny to anybody except maybe three of their friends because it's an in
Right.
joke, and
Right.
because they're coked up, they don't back down in the way that a normal person might when I've hit them with some artillery as an MC. So if you've got a hen party, some coked up city boys, a couple of couples who have had a row, and I've had this. That's definitely a bad audience, but they're rare.
Mm.
More often than not, when a comedian says it's a really bad crowd, it's more likely to be a representation of they failed that night.
And the difference between, I don't know if you can answer this, American crowds and English crowds, is there
Well,
a big
Americans are
difference?
louder in everything.
Right.
I had
Right.
it just is. It's you must know that of yourselves. We're the
It's
repressed,
certainly.
emotionally repressed English people, and you're the woo 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 for every bloody thing crowd. When I get
That's right.
American audiences in, and I'll ask where they're from, they won't just tell me the answer. Forgive me, I don't have the knowledge to quite back up what I'm about to say, but they won't just say Kansas City. They'll go Kansas City and then go woo 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 and name a football team from the university or something, which has literally no meaning to 95% of the other people in the room.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, um, I will say this: I find that the American comedians are very impressive. I'm always, I get
Mm.
messages from people all over the world saying I'm going to be in London for a couple of weeks. Could I get some stage time with you? And it's very rare that an American act lets me down. The Australians
Mm.
punch very well. The New Zealanders not bad. Canadians amazing. The Irish amazing. There's just something in the water in Canada and Ireland. But
Mm.
I was doing a piece as an MC, talking to the crowd, and for some reason or other, it came up. Has anybody here had therapy? And there were three young American girls at the back, young, but I mean like their early 20s, and they're like, "Whoa, yeah, whoa, yeah." I'm like, no English person in the room was going to put their hand up to a question like that. Like we keep that tight. I think the new
Right.
generation is becoming much
Yeah.
more relaxed and open about the idea of going to
They
therapy.
are.
But my generation
Yeah.
and 15 years behind, even if you do, you don't talk about it. It's Tony
Right.
Soprano time. But those girls are
Hmm.
whooping and cheering like the Ricky Lake show. So no,
Mm.
there's a huge difference between American and British audiences, but they're both great.
And your social media, Alfie, and
Hmm.
your Instagram, you have like these top tips, and I enjoyed most of them. I can do better.
I'm glad to hear it. What's that in reference to?
That was one of your top tips.
Oh, right. Let me be
Um,
clear. I'm not really into social media. I used to, as
ah,
I mentioned, be a film journalist and primarily in TV. I did print and radio as well. But for
right.
13 years, I basically went to every press screening of every single film that was released. So that's something like
Wow.
5 to 8 cinema visits every single week, and then go and shoot something about it, visit the set, interview the star, whatever it was, and then go into a windowless edit suite with a bank of monitors and edit all week, and then sit with my production crew and then watch the finished show. And after 13 years of that, I'd really had enough of being on a screen. And
Wow.
that kind of crisscrossed with the arrival of social media. That's part of the reason I love comedy so much, because it's a purely live experience. You know, if you film comedy, it doesn't matter how good the comedy is, you lose, I don't know what the percentage is, easily 50 or 70% of the quality of the jokes, the experience, the energy in the room. Like, whatever your favorite Netflix comedy special is, I guarantee you, whoever was actually in the room that night was filmed. And in fact, I had this privilege. Um, Bill
Mm,
Burr recorded his Paper Tiger special at the Royal Albert Hall here in London. I think he picked it just because Led Zeppelin had once played there. But it was one of our
mm,
grandest institutions. You know, it's the home of the Proms,
certainly.
classical music, made by Queen Victoria for her husband, hence the Royal Albert Hall. And I was there for the recording of the show when Bill
Wow.
was recording his Paper Tiger special that came out on Netflix like 6 months later. And yeah, it's a great special. Bill Burr's an amazing actor. He's one of my favourites.
Yeah.
But I promise you, the laughter we were giving in the room that night was 10 times any of the laughter I've seen from my friends when I've watched them watching it, because I made a point to do just that, invite friends to watch that with
Mm.
me. I'm fairly sure I got very far from your question. Oh, social media. Um, yeah, so I really don't do much social media. I'm fairly strong on Facebook because I'm an old man or an oldish man, and that I kind of jumped on at the beginning. But at this point, I just have I give my son a load of clips from my online courses, and I get my teenage son. I'm just like, put some stuff on social media in a way that makes sense. I'm not inclined to learn, so I'm assuming what you said to me a moment ago is reference to a title of one of the videos. Is that correct?
No, these are coaching tips, I'm sure, that you
Right.
give, and he just your social media person, your son, just puts the tips on for it. And so another one was keep your eyes, mind, and notebook open.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, he's paraphrased me, but that's perfect information.
Yes.
Yeah. My son, he's a great kid anyway, but he's impressed me even more so. Yeah, I don't have much to do with the social media here. I kind of keep across Facebook because I've grown up with it for 15 years. I'm familiar with it. And the
Sure.
website, I'm all over our website. But anything else we do is either done by my house MCs, Luke and Paul, or my son to a degree. So
But that advice itself is something that you advocate, obviously.
oh yeah, I mean, I've given him a list of, 1 or 2 line comedy tips that are just definitively true. Some of what I teach might be open to debate. I'm yet to meet somebody who can debate me and win, but I'm not
Mm,
necessarily 100%. There are, like, I'll give you an example. When we get into issues of punching up and punching down, and just for clarity, punching up is telling a joke,
mm,
quote unquote, the expense of somebody who's more powerful. It could be your president, it could be our prime minister, it could be a famous celebrity, a powerful corporation. And then punching down can get a little bit tricky. Punching down being the concept of making jokes at the expense of somebody or something that is perceived as weaker. And
mm,
that's when we get into difficult territory right now, because people don't necessarily share the convictions as to who or what is necessarily weaker. We had a sensational story here in Britain a number of years ago. We've got a genius comedian from Scotland, just an absolute master comedian, and known for being dark and offensive and just a fuck you attitude, basically. But he made a joke
mm.
about the a disabled child, and that really was punching down. Like, I'd really rather he was targeting the British Tory Party or some poorly behaved celebrity, whoever it might happen to be. That really was a case of punching down, and he took a lot of heat for it. But if somebody made a joke about, say, that happened to be a woman, well, that joke might just stand on its own on its own legs, just in its own right. But there are, of course, certain people that would focus on the fact that it's a woman first and foremost, as opposed to whatever trait this individual has that makes them an appropriate focus of the punchline. And so
Mm.
sometimes people can get confused between the topic and the object of the joke. So that's why we sometimes see these online spats about a comedian going too far. All I can say is every comedian ever is always just sincerely trying to make people laugh. Often they're trying to
Mm.
pick off what they consider to be fair targets, but social media being what it is, that anything can be read the wrong way, and there's always a crew of people ready to bitch and moan and attack about it. Most things are kind of dangerous territory unless you go for really clear punching up targets like a government. So I've given, that's one that's not absolute. The way I try and teach students, and as I say, this isn't absolute, is if you're making a joke about somebody for something they didn't choose to be, for example, their sexuality or the color of their skin, I think you're on really, really thin ice. Like, I'm sure there's a genius comedian out there who can thread that needle somehow or other. But I think that's a decent way of figuring out if they didn't choose to be the thing you're attacking them for, then you maybe want to find a different focus. But if they did choose to be a thing, such as a vegan, fair game, absolutely fair game. If they chose to be that, before we recorded, you mentioned you're a Manchester City supporter. You're fair game. If I want to make jokes about
Yes.
Manchester City, you're fair game because you chose that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
So, but I don't think that's watertight. One colleague in the industry has pointed out to me an exception to my theory there, which has never arisen, but he was correct. I'm not going to tell you what it is because it gets into really complicated things. It's never actually happened to break my theory, but it does prove to me my theory is not 100% watertight. It's at best 99% watertight. But I gave my son a number of definite, thorough pieces of comedy advice, and I said turn that into content for Instagram, and apparently he has because you've seen it.
Yeah.
Did you like
Certainly
it? Is he
has.
doing a good job?
Very good, very good. I'll mention a couple more, but going back to this punching down, we have comedians here in the States that talk about, highly controversial things, like some of
Good.
the conflicts that are happening now in our planet.
Mm.
And there are
Can I
those
just
who
jump in? I'm sorry, I took a
protest.
swig of a drink just then. When you said they're talking about highly controversial things, I said good because I
Yeah.
approve of comedians addressing controversial issues. In many ways, comedians are philosophers and they're masters of
Yes.
finding a new angle into a subject that everybody assumed they knew. And that's a highly important function. Look, at the end of the day, it's about making people laugh. But the very
Mm.
best of the comedians will make you laugh and make you think and maybe revisit an opinion. But then you went on to say, and with some of the conflicts going around the world, I'm like, I am not speaking of Gaza. When I went good, I want to be clear, I
Yes.
spoke too soon. That's a very, very hot potato, if that's what you were referring to. But anyway, I just
Well,
wanted to clarify myself. Please go ahead.
it's certainly one, but my point being is that we have a certain group of people that walk and leave the theater or picket or protest. I mean, your thoughts about this when they're kind of punching down like that? Certainly, here in the states, we have free speech. It's one of our amendments. It's our First Amendment, and just your thoughts about. I mean, does that tie in directly what you talk about with punching down?
Well, I think it ties more directly into people's interpretation of what down means. I mean, I use the
Mm,
example of there just as for the example is the focus of a punchline might be a woman. But it might be because she's famous. It might be a woman who's famous for this particular thing, and
mm,
really, that's why they've been chosen to be the focus. If a man had done that thing that they're famous for, they would have been the punchline. But there is a certain breed of person, many of them sadly seemingly looking for reasons to be offended and make a lot of noise about it, in my humble
mm,
opinion. But if
mm,
they decide to make the fact it's a woman primary as opposed to, well, no, it was just an individual with this trait, which is almost certainly what the comedian was really addressing. The comedian should absolutely be free to come and do anything like that. The Gaza thing as it is today, and I know this interview could be watched and listened to a long time after hopefully this tragedy is finished. Um, but comedians are so good comedians. Certain types of comedians are social commentators, and there is a long, nasty tradition of jokes being taken out of context, of as I say, somebody, if they want to interpret it as about a joke about a woman as opposed to a joke about a person notorious for this particular behavior, and they want to make that their rallying cry, well, social media very quickly allows them to, gather a mob, whether or not it's true. There was an incident here with one of our great comedians a few years ago, and he made a joke, which I know well enough never to try and do another comedian's joke. You shouldn't, but even in the context of this, I wouldn't do it justice. I'm nowhere near as good as this comedian. But he made a joke that touched upon injuries about soldiers coming back from Afghanistan, British soldiers coming back from Afghanistan. And the newspapers went to town on him.
Mm.
And they took the joke to like the families of injured and deceased soldiers that had come back and got their quote about what they thought about it. The reality was this brilliant comedian had been out to entertain the forces, and by definition, they'd been hanging out with some soldiers, had
Mm.
been shown around like the facilities, including the tent where people who have just lost limbs are. And one of the soldiers told him a joke in the medical tent, and he went, "That's great. Do you mind? Can I use that? That's such a great joke." And that's the joke he told, and that's the joke they came after
Wow.
him for. But that actually was told to him by a soldier in the shit, in a medical tent in
Mm.
Afghanistan. So if they
Mm.
can accept it, I don't think the readers of certain newspapers or people who are on, certain aspects of Instagram or whatever really have the right. If you're not in the room, you don't really know the context, the energy, the tone. Once you write it down, you lose all of that nuance. And I think we most know with the most scandalized people in society these days, nuance isn't typically their strong point.
Certainly so. Some more of your tips, your advice in social media. After writing, read it aloud
Mm.
and write jokes for yourself.
Yeah, well, they're two different pieces of information, but I've certainly observed. Again, I have to stress, over 10,000 open mic comedians have been in my room. I didn't see all of them, but I probably saw about 7 or 8 thousand of them.
Mm.
And some of them come in and you can see they're trying to pander and write to what they think the audience will like, and that's just a terrible mistake. Try and write to make yourself laugh, or a really good metric is if you've got a mate, a couple of friends that you enjoy making laugh, their comedy tone is right for you. That's why you're friends, and they make you laugh. Write for yourself, write for this audience
Mm.
of two, not what you think a generic audience that is amorphous and will shift from gig to gig, and there will be cultural shifts. The cultural shift from where we are today and 10 years ago is epic. The cultural shift from
Mm.
where we were today and 5 years ago is epic. Don't try and second guess the masses. Leave that to the politicians.
Mm.
Write for yourself, write for a couple of people whose comedy or sense of humour you admire. That was the second piece of advice you quoted to me. What was the first one?
I said, once you give a joke, read it out loud.
Yes, of course, but because it looks and sounds beautiful on the paper. When I used to write television scripts. I used to do many sorts of scripts, but one will be voiceovers for not for me, but for my presenters. And I just had a real thing for alliteration. The same letter, a word beginning with the same letter over and over and over. And for me, it felt like I was generating a style for the shows that I produced and directed, but it actually would trip up certain presenters, their voice, their delivery, their accent. This didn't suit them, so I'd have to do fast rewrites in the voiceover booth. Um, so what
Mm.
looks good on paper and you've heard it in your head, once you say it out loud, you might realize there's some tricky words there. There's just not a flow, there's not a rhythm. So it's very often a case of going, it looks good on paper, it sounds all right in my head, but actually delivered through the mouth, the lips, the movement of the tongue, all of a sudden it becomes a bit of a tongue twister. It leaves you maybe a little bit breathy at the wrong moment. These are all nuances, but if you put together 20 nuanced little pieces of information such as this, all of a sudden you've improved your set by 100% and more. So,
Wow.
editing is as important as writing. There's no two ways about that. It's absolutely true. The first draft is the worst draft, is my phrase. That's what I like to say. But Ernest Hemingway's phrase was the first draft of everything is shit. And I quote both of these lines as a matter of routine. The first draft is just getting it down and good. Just get it down. And then after that, flesh it out, edit it down, take out every word you don't need. There's all these aspects of how to improve your writing. A lot of people try and be funny by writing something down, look at it and go, oh, that just doesn't work. Yeah, it doesn't work yet. There's barely a comedian on the
Mm.
world whose first draft is any good, you know. Most of the comedians you see on Netflix, it takes them 2 years to generate another hour for the next one, and they're professionals. So saying it out loud allows you to see if there's any tricky wording. Then you revisit it, and then you just smooth it out somehow. You know, thesaurus.com is such a super tool available to writers of all sorts. You know, I've been a professional writer in some form or another for over 30 years now. I still
Mm.
refer to it all the time. If that word's just not flowing, it's a bit tricky, maybe it's a little bit confusing. As I said, it's a homonym, it's got two meanings. Go to thesaurus.com and find another word that fits. Very often you go, oh, I didn't think of that. That is indeed better.
Mm.
You'll find another way into the joke. So yeah, just writing it down, and the first time you say it out loud on stage is a silly error to make and easily avoided.
Alfie Noakes, what motivates you?
What motivates me? My son, probably more than anything. He's amazing. Yeah, sorry to give such an Oprah Winfrey Show type answer, but yeah, I'm especially fond of my son. I really like him, and I imagine that I think there's Christians in America have like bangles who say things like, "What would Jesus do?" I think there's slightly funkier people that have "What would Beyonce do?" And if I did
Ah,
have such a thing, it'd be like, "What should I do in front of my son?" So yeah, my son inspires me more than anything else. Sorry, that's so
and,
not a funny answer, but it happens to be true.
it doesn't need to be funny. Do you want him to be an MC in the comedy scene?
Oh God, no. He did his first set when he was 7 years old. He's done
Wow.
35 gigs. He's done two gigs at the Edinburgh Festival. You know, that's it's just like a different deal when it's like bring your kid to work day when your dad is me. But no, I always knew it would help him with kind of, you know, courage, public speaking, creative writing, just generally presenting himself. He had a lot of fun doing it. But I think, you know, since before the pandemic, he was already clear he wasn't bothered about doing it again. And nor would I choose it for him.
Hmm. Why?
It's, a great comedian, like a world class pro friend of mine. When I was in the early days of kind of getting into promoting this stuff, you know, he just said to me, "It's a hard knock life," which I've since come to realise is a quote from the film Annie, which speaks entirely to his homosexual tastes. But it's true; it is a hard knock life. There's a, you know, it's a lot of time between that first open mic and probably getting paid decent money if you can achieve that at all. There's a lot of travelling.
Mm.
You know, I love eccentric people. Otherwise, I couldn't possibly be in this business. But there is a lot of eccentric people, and a tiny minority of those are very, very toxic people.
Mm.
It's just a hard knock life. I just think there's other ways to what everyone. I know what you want to do. I'm not going to say it here, but it's a much more kind of normal route. Most comedians who do it really should be doing it. They've got a natural inclination for it, and they've got a true hankering and ambition for it. I should make it clear that in the open mic circuit, you know, we stage, depending over the years, the most I've done is 6 shows a week, week after week, like for over a year. Now we're currently two gigs a week. It fluctuates depending on circumstances. But you know, at certain times, I've been watching close to 120 acts a week, um,
Wow.
and yeah, maybe 20% of the open mic scene. And this is in London, so it's a very serious town in certain regards. Like people come here to try and make it in the same way I
Mm.
imagine they go to New York and Los Angeles. Maybe San Francisco. Boston's got a great reputation, but I don't think you go there to make it. I think you go there to learn it, and then you would probably have to
Mm.
go to LA. But yeah, maybe 80% of people who do it are not ambitious to get to a professional level. They might like to get a bit of money here and there and move up the ranks a bit, but they're not really planning on changing their day job. It's for many people, it's a hobby. Some people
Hmm.
take that hobby very seriously, and some people just dip in and out. But yeah, it's 20% thereabouts, if I had to guess, who are people who genuinely, specifically want to be a professional stand up comedian or at least make a living from comedy because there's other ways of doing it without being a stand up comedian. You can be a writer for a show. I mean, obviously, you've got all the late night shows in America. We have them once a week. Coincidentally, the two of them simultaneously on different channels. We don't have enough celebrities here to sustain 5 nights a week. And you know, you've got how many, 4 or 5 of them that are,
Yeah, there's a
each
lot.
night. Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's an American tradition that we don't quite have here. We've tried to do it and we failed. But they can be writing for shows like that. Radio 4 here, BBC Radio 4. I think the nearest parallel will be your NPR, but it's still a different beast. Great way of bringing on talent. Radio 4, a lot of their radio shows get repeated over and over to new series. Some of their shows end up becoming hit television shows. Things like The Day Today, The Alan Partridge Character, Little Britain, all of these shows began as radio shows. The BBC being the organisation it is, it's very good at giving fresh talent an opportunity, and then there's a process to move them through. So you don't necessarily have to be a professional stand-up comedian making your living from the clubs or from television appearances. You could be writing for those shows, radio, television, and the like, and still be making a living as a funny person, just not a stand-up.
Mm.
Usually, it's a blend of both. But yeah, most people doing open mic comedy aren't planning to become a professional open mic comedian. There's a lot of transferable skills as well. We get a lot of teachers doing it, and I think a
Mm.
lot of them are trying to vent with what they'd really like to shout at 8-year-old little Billy who annoyed him that morning, and this is their way of venting. Obviously, teachers tend to be quite smart, so they're eloquent, they've got an angle. Fair few lawyers, people who work with words are part of the scene. Obviously, incredible transferable skills if you're quite good at comedy, because essentially, if you ever talk to anyone, then being able to be funny is a bonus in any circumstance, whether that's with your work colleagues, your mates in the pub, somebody you're trying to chat up and date and seduce and make them your wife or your husband, or
Mm.
becoming a professional comedian and making, 4,000 people in an arena laugh. It doesn't matter what scale you're operating at. Being able to manage the nerves, control yourself, present yourself, speak clearly, get jokes in, know when to shut up, use your body language appropriately. All of these things come with emceeing primarily, but comedy in general. So a lot of people say you're a professional public speaker or a life coach. You don't have to want to be a comedian, but you should definitely have a few goes at stand-up comedy. It will make you better at your day job.
Mm. I can't help but think of, Ricky Gervais's character, David Brent,
David
who
Brent.
feels that he is, a comedian, but, and tries to incorporate that into his job, but perhaps isn't the best.
Ricky's a different beast altogether. He's done things in a very strange order, and I want to make it clear. I
Yeah.
think he's a genius, and he's a genius who knows he's a genius, and he's there to do exactly what great comedians should do, which is take the piss out of the zeitgeist and anybody who's really up themselves and is getting, a big head, to put that in check. I think he's a wonderful human being who's done something that very few people have achieved. I mean, I'm thinking who else has been able to. Gary Shandling would be one, but I think Ricky's got at least 3 genuinely classic TV shows under his belt, if not 4. Is there anybody in the history of the world who ever achieved that? And he wasn't a stand-up first. He used to be a booker for the student union. He used to book the bands and the
Huh.
entertainment. Then he got a radio show on XFM where he was very much the Ricky Gervais we know today. He hasn't changed, it seems to me. He was still this
Mm.
cheeky chappy taking the mickey with that wild laugh of his, carving his own path. And then he made The Office, but then he went on to make Extras. And then he went on to make Derek, which I think is wonderful. And then
Yep.
he did Life is Short, which is probably the low watermark. But for him, most people, that would be their high watermark. And then
I thought it was very funny.
yeah,
Yeah.
so did I. But it's out of
Yeah.
the incredible output, in my opinion, he's
Yeah.
delivered. That's the low watermark, and it's still very high. Most people couldn't achieve that. And then, of course, he's got is it Afterlife? Am I saying
Yeah.
it?
Afterlife,
Yeah,
I think at least 2 seasons. Yeah.
yeah. So that's 4, in my humble opinion. But frankly, I'm
Yeah.
not that humble. I used to make TV shows, and I've worked in comedy for over a decade. I know what I'm talking about. That's
Plus
4
movies.
classic TV shows.
Yeah.
Gary Shandling had 2. Is there
Yeah.
anybody else that has had 2 or
Well, he
more
he also made a
classics?
great movie, the one where he was a
Several.
liar.
Yeah, The Invention of
Yeah,
Lying.
The
Yeah,
Invention of Lying.
and then
Yeah.
there's Ghost World. But yeah, Ricky didn't get to doing the stand up till later. He basically was a radio
Yeah.
presenter. The Office came around. He made another TV show. He made some movies, and then he started doing stand up. I think it went
Mm.
something like that. But he definitely didn't begin as a stand up, which is remarkable. But that's somewhere between, because not everything is about talent. A lot is about character. I'm sure you know that in life in general. You can have all the talent in the world, but if you don't have the character and the discipline to back it up, it's not going to go very far. You'll be outdone by the person who's got moderate talent and a hard work ethic. But Ricky has just kind of carved his path. Whatever he seems to turn his hand to, it works, and he seems to have remained a grounded, decent person. I do get irritated when he does, he does something. I think, his last special, he seemed to be making a point to have a go at, the woke, and I'm not going to get embroiled in that particular one, other than to say I think it was the weakest special he's made. It seemed to be more about having a go at people than it was getting the high quality of laugh that Supernature and the other ones had.
Hmm.
But I do find it kind of galling when I'm on kind of, the comedy forums, and I see, open mic comedians with, 80 gigs experience tearing into the likes of Dave Chappelle and Ricky Gervais, and just go, you know, I used to direct TV programs, but I'm not going to tell you what's right or wrong with Martin Scorsese.
Hmm. I'm a big fan of Ricky Gervais. I was talking specifically about his character in The Office, David Brent, where he
Mhm.
works in an office, but he still, fancies himself as a comedian and
Yeah.
perhaps not the best. And there's lots of awkwardness there that's very, very funny. How do you measure success, Alfie?
Just very briefly on the David Brent thing, if I may, and then I'll answer that question.
Yeah,
Do understand that whenever we get a character along the lines of a David Brent, I hope you're familiar with Alan Partridge, the Steve Coogan
of
character.
course.
Um,
Yes.
they're both brilliant, and they're both generated. I mean, Alan Partridge was created by a committee of people. I believe Stuart Lee, Richard Herring, Armando Iannucci were all involved because it came from a radio show. But after the first year or two, it was Coogan, with Armando probably holding his hand a little bit. But every character comedian I've ever dealt with has always made it crystal clear to me, this character is just me. It's just an exaggerated version of me. I've made
Mm,
the failings, the weak parts, the nervous inner traits visible to the audience. These men, all these characters, they happen to be men, Partridge and Brent. Uh, they're brilliant characters and creations, but I think all of their creators will be the first to admit this is just a version of me, the bit that I really don't want the world to see, and I've managed to
mm.
vent it this way. I'm sorry, your question was what does
How do you
success look
measure
like?
success? How do you measure it?
Me personally or the industry?
You, Alfie Noakes.
Again, I hate to be facile and sound like I'm on the Oprah Winfrey show, but it's got to be contentment and happiness. I like myself. I'll put it that way. I've had to deal with, as I'm sure everybody who's reached a certain age, and sadly even some younger people, we've all dealt with some hard stuff. A loss, an illness, all sorts of things. Personally, I was bankrupted in the 2008 banking crisis. I've had health issues. I've lost friends that have passed. We all have our crosses to bear the longer we go on into the world. Um, but throughout each of these scenarios, challenges, dark days, I personally can look back and go, no, I'm proud of how I conducted myself. I didn't lash out in a moment of anger and do something that I
Mm,
truly regret. I've sacrificed for the right cause at the right time. That allows me, even at moments when things otherwise aren't going great, for me to go, no, I do like myself. And there's probably some people who know me who will go, he is so deluded. He's a terrible human being. Uh, but I can assure you they're wrong. When the chips are down, I sincerely
of
believe I've always
course.
done the right thing. When the chips aren't down, there are a multitude of examples of when I've definitely done the wrong thing. Okay, I'm not putting myself out as a saint, but when it truly counts, I'm proud of how I've conducted myself. And on account of that, I'm a successful person. I'm certainly not as wealthy as any number of some of my friends, some of my heroes, but wealth isn't measured in money. But an absolute lack of money is definitely a measure of some kind of failure. Money
Mm,
is, as a friend of mine calls them, freedom tokens. So yeah, it's not fame. I've known a lot of famous people over the years. Most of them kind of regret having it after a while. It's very exciting being asked for your autograph the first time. It's really far from exciting when you can't really just go to the corner shop to get a pint of milk or a packet of cigarettes
mm.
because 15 people are going to ask for your autograph. I've known a couple that have had to take on security. They can't go anywhere without two bodyguards. That's a very expensive thing, and it's an intrusion on your privacy. You've got two relative strangers on your payroll around you all the time. So I think people should be very careful about seeking fame. I think the sweet spot in success would be how many, before I answer that, how many film directors do you imagine you could recognize by sight? Like if I showed you a photograph, I've no doubt you'd recognize
Yeah,
Steven Spielberg, George Lucas. Would you
less than
recognize,
10.
yeah, would you recognize Christopher Nolan?
I think I would.
Okay, but he's probably running. Okay, so I think that's a great place to be. If you're a highly lauded film director or something like that,
Mm.
where your industry knows and recognizes you, but you've still got the ability to walk down the street. Because I was a film journalist, I actually know what most of them look like. I ran into Philip Noyce, who directed Dead Calm, the film with Nicole Kidman back in the day. He did two of the Harrison Ford, Jack Ryan films, Clear and Present Danger. Because I was a film journalist, I knew who he was. I ran into him in a pub and I got to have a lovely chat with him all night long. Asking him about his career. It was wonderfully exciting for me. But the rest of the people in the room had no idea that this man's probably spent a year of his life telling Harrison Ford what to do.
Wow.
I've got musician friends whose real ambitions have been not to become pop stars or music stars, is to become highly regarded session musicians, because that way they get to play with a huge array of the most talented and famous musicians in the world. Those musicians who hire them in obviously respect them, that they get to work with
Mm.
Elton John and Adele and whoever it might happen to be. They get paid very handsomely. They get to live a bit of a rock and roll life touring with whoever this superstar is, but they don't have to have the personal security. They don't get the tabloids chasing them. So, a very long answer to a short question, which I think I've been doing throughout. But I think success is liking oneself, acting suitably correctly, that you don't look back and going, that was a cheap shot. I took a shortcut. That was a spiteful act. Those kind of things will depress somebody's soul, for want of a better description. Aspiring for money and fame is no good thing. Aspiring for enough money to be comfortable and maybe a bit more than comfortable, I see no problem with that. And fame to the point of being recognised by your peers whose opinions you respect, I think that's a really good thing to aspire to. But to be broadly recognised by members of the public, I've seen it over and again, it's a hellscape.
Mm. So, Alfie, I started I'm in the tech industry, and I was working way too much, and wasn't eating properly, poor nutrition, got myself up to about 240 pounds,
Yeah, I heard, yeah.
way overweight. The doctor said to me, if I don't lose, the weight, I'm not going to see my daughter graduate, so she was just born. And so I spent the next 6, 7 months, lost about 130 pounds. And people ask me
Incredible.
how. Yeah, people ask me how, and I always say discipline, right? That's it. I just got
Yeah.
focused. I got discipline.
Hence the
So I
name of
wonder,
the show.
very much so, how does discipline play a role in your life, Alfie?
Well, I've got a small business that I've got to keep moving forward so that I can look after my son and approach some of my future aspirations. I got a little bit tired of, I've been emceeing and running shows and having acts cancel at the last minute and having to write up listings and all over. I've done it for years and years and years. It was time for a new thing. So I've moved into the teaching, whether it's the one-to-one coaching or, learning new skills. Digital marketing and the like is a new skill set to me. Um, I'm sorry, remind me of the exact question. I've got a feeling I'm going off piste. I apologise.
No, don't
Discipline.
apologize. How does it play a role in your life?
Oh, absolutely. I've been freelance every job of my adult career. So for the 13 years in TV, I was freelance. So it's about doing a good job and being liked, so that the people you work with will go to another show and then invite you on, and then laterally I can do the same. So the discipline of doing a good job and coming across well, even if you're having a bad day, it's not really your role to take it out on other people.
Mm,
In fact, it's counterproductive if I'm having a bad day and I'm just rude to, say, the guy at the corner shop. Well, he's the guy at my corner shop. I'm going to see him all the time, and if he thinks I was being a bit of an asshole that day, he's maybe likely to be a bit blunt and brusque with me in the future, when I was
mm,
otherwise having a good day, and that might me bring down a little bit. So I'm a little bit with the
mm,
Beatles. The love you take is equal to the love you make. So the
mm,
discipline not to be at the whim of your emotions where possible. Try and be a little bit more pleasant where you can. But for me personally, as a freelancer, in the television days, as soon as my contract finished, my full time job became getting the next job. So I would be,
wow.
emailing former colleagues, writing up pitches and specs for shows, trying to arrange meetings with commissioning editors and those kind of things. So even though I'm not getting paid for it, I get paid very handsomely when I'm making the show, and that gives me enough money to get through the dormant periods. But I effectively took on a new role to get the new job. And at this point in time, the discipline is I get up every morning. I work largely alone. I'm on my computer, editing, writing, learning. I've got 500 emails with a star on them, which means they need my attention. There's something good there. Well, that would be 2 months worth of work on its own. But I never wake up and go, oh my God, I've got to do this. At worst, it's, oh my God, I've got to do this, but I can have a cup of coffee first. And as soon as I've done that, I'm good to go. So my discipline is, I don't need a boss breathing down my neck. I don't need exactly a regular paycheck. I need to be able to do something I enjoy doing, largely with people I enjoy doing it with. And that's enough fuel for me. That's where my discipline comes from.
That's remarkable. Alfie, I'm so excited we set this up. I love comedy. I love what you're doing. I mean, you're a coach, you're a teacher, you're an author. How can anybody listening get in touch with you?
Well, my email address is Alfie, Alfie, at wearefunnyproject.com, but everything's at the website. It's wearefunnyproject.com. There's lots of free information on there for people who are thinking about doing comedy or people who are already doing it comedy, whether they're just beginning or they're relatively advanced. I wouldn't presume to try and give advice to somebody who's a professional. But there's lots of free resources there, both videos and blogs. But also, if somebody really wants the good stuff, then there's the paid online courses, beginner, advanced, and MCs. They come with a guarantee, so it's risk free if they take the course and they don't like it. As long as they do it within 30 days, I'll give them their money back. But yeah, blogs, videos, pretty much whatever information you might need to access if you're thinking of starting comedy, or if you've already started comedy and you want to just get better quicker, it's all there.
wearefunnyproject.com. It's Facebook, Instagram, Linktree. You're on YouTube as well. You got a lot of great YouTube videos. Alfie, thank you so much for your time. I hope one day when I'm there in your area, we can get together and have a pint.
Oh, mate, we'll do more than that. I'll bring you into one of the shows and we'll have a pint and a laugh.
Here
May
we
I
go.
add one more thing, please?
Of course.
I should have mentioned this. If anybody does go to the website, if they sign up to the mailer, there's a 36-page free ebook for them. 8 ways to turbocharge your stand-up comedy, and within it there's video links as well. So it's more than just an ebook. So you give me your email address and go on my mailing list, and I'll give you 8 excellent tips on how to get better at comedy.
I'll make sure we put it in the show notes. Alfie, thank you so much for your time. I wish you well. I hope to see you soon.
I look forward to it. Really nice to be in touch with you. Thanks for having me on the show, mate.
Cheers. Thank you for listening and or viewing Joey Pinz Disciple Conversations. Please share this episode with one or two of your friends who you think may benefit from the episode. Our website, www.joeypinz.com. There you'll find lots of resources and you could join our mailing list. Please follow us on all our social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Podcast information, the video version of our podcast is on YouTube. Please subscribe. Audio is on all major podcasting platforms. Please follow them. And if you like it, please consider giving 5-star rating. Would really appreciate that. Would you like to financially support the podcast? You can go to our Patreon site. Consider $5, $10, or $20 a month. There's all kind of plans that we have there. There's like a one-time payment. What is this podcast episode worth to you? $25, $50, $100, $500, $1,000, $5,000. You be the judge. You can go to our PayPal account to do that as well. Thank you again for listening or watching Joey Pinz Disciple Conversations.